Hello and welcome to 40-Minute Focus, the College of Education, Department of Educational Leadership Studies, free webinars from experts on important topics for busy school leaders. I'm John Nash. I'm an associate professor in educational leadership studies at the University of Kentucky, and I'm your moderator for today. I'd like to tell you a little bit about our department and what we're offering today, and a little bit about the interactive features in our webinar series. So a little bit about us, the Educational Leadership Studies Department at the University of Kentucky. We are a department offering high-quality online educational leadership credentials, ranging from doctorate degrees to education specialist degrees, down through principal and superintendent certification, and some graduate certificates. A new one, which may be of interest, our Executive School Leadership Certificate, which is focusing on credentialing for international and independent schools. The nice thing about our program is because it's all online, our students and our partners are leading globally. Our campus is in Lexington, Kentucky, and our students are far-flung from Hawaii to Beijing, from Ho Chi Minh City to Finland, partners in South Africa, all reaching in to us to get a good quality education with our programs. But the focus for us today is to talk about our webinar. And this webinar series is part of our outreach to get more impact for the kinds of things that we think are important for school leaders. So let me talk a little bit about the interactive features in today's live webinar. This webinar is being recorded, and at the end of the webinar, you'll have a chance to access that recording. But let me talk a little bit about what we have today. Firstly, we have an opportunity for you to ask questions of the webinar panelist, and we'll introduce her in a moment. So you can ask a question using the Zoom panel, and you can do this by getting into the Q&A button on your screen, and you can type a question. We'll answer that during the session. You can also participate in webinar polls and chats, and so during the webinar you'll have a chance to do that. And I think we have an opportunity right now to practice live on this. So let me ask you this right now. How did you hear about this webinar? So we're going to open up a poll right now, and we're going to launch this poll. And you can have a chance to do that. That's open now. And so how did you hear about this webinar? Was it from an email list you subscribed to? Was it on Twitter, LinkedIn, a friend or colleague recommended it? Maybe a professor recommended it, or was it someone else? So if you have a chance, go ahead and click in there. We've got a few attendees here, the folks that registered. Some people I know may be listening in and they don't have access to the computer, and so that's fine, but we wanted to offer that up. I'll leave that open for just another second, and we'll see what kinds of results we get. About 5 more seconds there to answer this poll. How did you hear about this webinar? Excellent. Okay, I'm going to end the poll so we can look at that, and we'll share these results. So a few people online today, and they're able to respond to the poll. Some on email, some on Twitter, and some recommended from a professor. So that's great. We're getting some interest from across several channels. Right. Well, so now we got the hang of the polling. We'll get on to the business of the webinar. After the webinar, you'll have a chance to fill out an exit survey. It'll give you an opportunity to get a copy of today's slides, let us know how the webinar worked out for you, and also get some information about our graduate programs here at the University of Kentucky. So now, without further ado, let's get to the topic at hand. Today's 40-minute focus is what happened to ISLLC, and I'd like to introduce our panelist, Dr. Lu Young. Dr. Young is an associate clinical professor at the University of Kentucky in the Department of Educational Leadership, and she'll be talking today about the move from ISLLC to PSEL. And so, thank you, Dr. Young.
Thank you, Dr. Nash, and hello, everyone. Thanks so much for taking time out of a busy Friday afternoon for our 40-minute focus. Dr. Nash and I are excited about the potential for the webinar series, and I'm honored to be able to spend some time with you this afternoon to share a little bit about the professional standards for educational leaders and what happened to ISLLC. As Dr. Nash mentioned, I'm an associate clinical professor here at the university, and I have 31 and a half years of experience as a public school teacher and leader, 9 years as a school superintendent, and lots of years teaching and leading schools and leading in districts. So this topic, of course, means a lot to me, so I have lots of reasons to care, but Dr. Nash taught me about this new craze of listicles. So we are going to try one today. 3 reasons you might care about PSEL. I'm not sure that this is worthy of David Letterman at all, but it gets us right into our conversation. So if you're a principal or aspiring principal, you'll probably care about PSEL because it may become the basis for your professional evaluation. If you supervise principals, you'll probably care because PSEL may become your district leadership framework. And if you're like me, an educational leadership faculty, training principals, superintendents, supervisors of instruction, you probably care because PSEL may become your program standards for approval as we move forward. So those are the big ideas. We had some specific objectives for today's session. I'm hoping that in this short time we have together that perhaps we will raise awareness of the professional standards for educational leaders and what that means for ed leaders as well as preparation program faculty and higher ed. We'll also dive a bit into the contrast between PSEL, the new standards, and our former standards that we call ISLLC, the Interstate School Leadership Licensure Consortium standards that we've had for many years. And then lastly, we'll explore what PSEL might mean for you, what implications it may have for your professional life and that of your school. So to do that, we're going to try another poll question. Dr. Nash is going to pop up for us. How well informed do you, as our audience today, feel about the PSEL standards? We'll take, for those of you who have access to a device and are not driving, you have some options there: not informed, slightly informed, moderately informed, or very informed. We have some responses coming in. Let's take about 5 more seconds. Okay, thank you. And then here's the results there. You can see we have 2 that categorize themselves in the slightly informed bucket, and then 3 in the moderately informed bucket. So that's really helpful for me to know the level of detail that we can explore while we're together today. Thank you for engaging in that. So a lot of people refer to PSEL as the new ISLLC. I'm not sure that that's a really trendy title, but the professional standards for educational leadership are in fact the new and revised ISLLC standards that we have worked with since original publication in 1996. In 1996, the Council for Chief State School Officers, CCSSO, promulgated the first set of standards for educational leaders known as ISLLC. Those standards were revised fairly significantly again in 2008, also promulgated by CCSSO. And now we have the professional standards for educational leaders. This work was done and published first in 2015 by the National Policy Board for Educational Administration in conjunction with CCSSO, as well as several partners, partner organizations that you'll be familiar with, including the American Association of Colleges of Teacher Education, AASA, the American Association of School Administrators, CAPE, our accrediting body, CCSSO, whom I mentioned earlier, as well as the National Association of Elementary School Principals and Secondary School Principals, and then the National School Boards Association and the University Council for Education Administration. So lots of partners collaborated to develop the professional standards for ed leaders, or PSEL, and these were published in November of 2015. These standards articulate the knowledge, skills, and dispositions expected of today's school leaders. The PSEL standards will be adopted or adapted by many states in the coming years to guide policies concerning the practice, development, and evaluation of school leaders, including licensure and professional evaluation considerations. I like this quote about the standards. The NPBEA folks said that the standards have been recast with a stronger, clear emphasis on students and student learning. I'll give you a second to read the rest of that quote. And I think you'll find, for those of you who are somewhat familiar with PSEL as you go through, as I did, that the emphasis on each child is a really nice theme that is threaded throughout PSEL, as well as this kind of 21st century flair, and as it notes here, elevating the work of ed leaders that we are now becoming more and more keenly aware of. So a lot of folks will ask, and I know my students do in my courses, why do we need professional standards in the first place? Professional standards define the nature and the quality of work of people in that field, in our case, educational leaders. Professional standards are created for and by members of the profession to guide practice, and in our case, to guide programs that prepare principals in their fields, ensuring that practitioners are prepared, hired, developed, supervised, and evaluated in accordance to industry standards and expectations. In our case, professional standards also inform government policies and regulations that oversee the education profession, including professional ethics. Professional standards embody the values of the profession and stand for and illustrate how practitioners can achieve the outcomes that the profession demands and the public expects. This quote, taken from the professional standards, the PSEL document itself, was one that John and I felt like really touched where you might be on this end of a Friday afternoon. So take a look at that quote for a minute. For those of you who are perhaps driving, it's the end of another Friday, and in schools around the country, educational leaders are shutting down their computers and heading home after another full throttle day. As they leave the building, they replay the events of the day and ask themselves, did I make a difference today for our students? Did I focus on what matters most for their learning and well-being? On a personal level, that's what PSEL standards can mean for you as a busy school leader, a school leader who cares about her students and about the impact that she's having on students every day. So I tend to personalize the standards a lot and think about what they will mean for those leaders in the field who are out there on a daily basis trying to make an important difference. But that also begs the question, why new standards now? And I think there's some key drivers in that regard. Professional standards aren't static. In order to remain relevant, they must be continuously monitored and assessed, and then they must respond to the field and to practice. PSEL standards reflect new knowledge and understanding, as we noted earlier, gained from practice and research, especially in the last 10 years. So those overarching drivers for me are twofold. Number one, educational leadership as a profession has evolved significantly in the last decade or so. We know more than ever before that educational leaders have a significant impact on student achievement in their schools, as well as the development of the adults in their systems. School leaders accomplish big goals by creating rigorous yet caring and supportive learning environments for all kids and the conditions in which students and adults thrive. Secondly, the world in which we find ourselves today has dramatically changed. The transformation that we see to a global economy, the expectations that society has for us as school leaders, the rapid changes in technology and the use of technology, the integration of technology to improve student learning and access, all of those world-changing factors contribute to the need for new, more modern professional standards for educational leaders. And that change is likely to continue rapidly. We wanted to drill down a little bit further into the Kentucky context where PSEL exists now. And so we've been doing some work over the last 2 years as part of the Wallace Foundation grant. That work is called UPPI, University Principal Preparation Initiative. And thanks to support from the Wallace Foundation, the Kentucky Educational Professional Standards Board, now called the Office of Educator Licensure and Effectiveness, brought together practitioners, community members, and higher ed partners to grapple with the professional standards and to make decisions about how we would move forward with PSEL in Kentucky. And while I'm using Kentucky as a context, it's really important for those of you who may be joining us from other states or even outside the US, that this kind of work in Kentucky is happening in multiple other states right now. In fact, Kentucky is one of 15 or so that have already adopted PSEL as part of their licensure and evaluation programs in the state for school leaders. So over the summer, there was a new regulation that was codified. It took several regulations around leadership certification and preparation and bundled them together in 16 KAR 3:090 entitled Certifications for Advanced Educational Leaders. So this new Uber reg is the one that guides the development for us in higher ed of principal preparation programs, and quite likely will be the same reg that guides the evaluation of principals moving forward. To be really clear, if you're a Kentucky principal or aspiring principal, you are still being evaluated under ISLLC, but we've spoken with the Kentucky Department of Education, and their team there is moving forward pretty aggressively to open new regs related to principal evaluation to incorporate PSEL by reference in those regs as it has been for higher ed and preparation. So if you think about the timeline as it plays out, those of us in higher ed are gearing up to incorporate PSEL in our courses this fall and moving forward so that new principals being trained in the state come into schools with PSEL preparation, and then their evaluation will follow. So we're in tandem in that move forward here in Kentucky. And in fact, my colleagues here at the University of Kentucky have already revised our syllabi, our program plans, and all of the forms and documents that go along with that to incorporate PSEL as the foundation for our program here at the University of Kentucky. So another big idea that we wanted to unpack is then now we have new standards and most states are leaning toward incorporating these standards. More than 45 states had been using ISLLC. It's likely that many states and even more will move toward PSEL for all the reasons that I've mentioned to this point. So how are they alike and how are they different? Before we explore that further, I want to take the chance to hear from you guys in the chat feature, again, unless you're driving and don't have safe access. But when you think about ISLLC, whatever your experience has been with ISLLC to this point, what weaknesses in the original standards come to mind? What didn't work well for you with ISLLC? Any thoughts about that? You should see the chat feature available to you there somewhere on your toolbar. And if you do have some thoughts about ISLLC challenges or weakness and would be willing to share those, please do, and I'll try to monitor the chat as those pop up. Some great work was done by the Center on Great Teachers and Leaders at the American Institutes for Research in collaboration with the Council for Chief State School Officers to crosswalk PSEL and ISLLC and to take a deep dive into the key differences between those two sets of standards. Overall, PSEL fared very well in the crosswalk, as you might imagine, because it incorporated some really modern constructs throughout that frankly had been missing in ISLLC as it got older. So those kind of key 4 difference areas are noted here on the screen. Equity, for example, is a front and center concern for all of us in school leadership today. PSEL very firmly calls for school contexts focused on equity and cultural responsiveness. It's a mandate, it's an imperative in the standards, and the framers have done a really nice job of threading equity across the standards in a very integrated way. So it's not stop, drop, and attend to equity. Instead, the illustration is one where equity, in fact, is front and center and front of the mind in the decisions that a school leader will make. Another big difference area is that around talent development. For those of us who have taught HR courses around ISLLC in the past, it's kind of tough to make links to human resources and ISLLC. There's some broad nods to human talent development in ISLLC. PSEL has devoted 2 full standards to working with educators, building capacity among educators and staff, as well as developing talent through a pipeline approach to school leadership. The whole notion of leadership is treated somewhat differently in PSEL, and I think in a much more integrated and effective way as compared to ISLLC. And the 10th of the 10 PSEL standards, in fact, is called school improvement. So really linking leadership to continuous improvement in the model is very solidly threaded throughout PSEL. And last one that I've heard often from the field, from policymakers, and from families, is that PSEL really illustrates learning leadership around a set of high expectations. There's a lot more depth and specificity around intellectual rigor, deeper learning for all kids, and coherence as foundational elements across PSEL. So you can see that I'm a fan. I find the standards easier to work with in general. The language is much more user-friendly. And then one other thing I hope you've noticed as well, if not, when you have a chance to dig into the standards, I think you'll see that they're very building level focused. They're principal facing documents. ISLLC sometimes went too many thousand feet in the air, really focused more on district administration and school superintendents. And sometimes principals lamented that they couldn't find themselves in the standards. When you read the PSEL standards, I think you'll see that they are student focused and principal facing. That if you're a school principal or an assistant principal, an instructional coach at a school, I think you'll read these indicators and elements and say, yeah, that's a good description of the work that I do, or the level of performance I aspire to. So let's dig in and take a closer look at the standards. First, by the numbers. There are 10 PSEL standards, up from 6 ISLLC standards. And there are 83 elements or indicators, up from 31 functions in ISLLC. Now, don't let that expansion in numbers or girth bother you at all. I don't think that they are that there are too many, that they are too broad. Instead, I think that you will find that the increased number of standards and the increased number of elements just adds a level of description and specificity that we often long for in ISLLC. They're really very illustrative of the kind of work that effective school leaders engage in on a day-to-day basis. So 10 standards, 83 elements, and I like this approach that the National Policy Board took around the clustering of standards around what they call 3 logic clusters. The first logic cluster is the drivers of the standards. So standards 1, 2, and 3, as well as that standard 10 improvement, continuous improvement standard that I mentioned to you earlier. So driving the standards are mission, vision, core values, professional norms and ethics, as well as equity and cultural responsiveness, along with that anchor standard 10. So it takes a full loop back to those drivers, which is continuous improvement. The core standards, right in the middle, at the heart of the work. Standard 4 is around curriculum instruction, the teaching and learning standards, as well as assessment. And then standard 5, I love the name of this one. It's a community of care and support for students. So right in the heart of this model, this logic cluster model, is students, and wrapped around that, a culture of support. So students, teaching and learning, and care and support are at the heart of this work. And then lastly, supports. We can't ignore the hard lines of the work that we do as school leaders. So standards 6 and 7, now you have standards devoted specifically to human capital development, as well as operations and management and all of the stuff that makes our schools work. So I really like the gestalt that happens in this notion of drivers, core, and supports, and how the standards are clustered that way. Here's a look, many thanks to John for the graphics in today's webinar. So here's a look at those. You see the drivers there, as I mentioned earlier, and the impact they have in focusing the work moving forward. The real heart of the work, teaching, learning, assessment, and this community of care. And then lastly, capacity building, talent development for teachers and staff, meaningfully engaging families and communities. This whole community wrapped around the whole child model is really affirming throughout PSEL, and then a strong nod to operations and management in standard 9. So let's pause a minute. I haven't seen anything pop up in chat yet, but if you are interested in engaging this question, what do you think about that logic cluster model, or anything we've mentioned to this point about PSEL? Have you found that clustering model to be useful? What other thoughts did that conjure up? I'll give you a few seconds there to access your chat feature if you'd like to engage with us from your side of the webinar. And John, if you notice anything in the chat that I've missed, please don't hesitate to call it to my attention. All right, thank you. We also wanted to spend a little bit of time together. We're coming up on about 10 minutes left in our webinar time. So probably my favorite top 2 or 3 PSEL standards is that standard 3 that I've mentioned several times already, and that is equity and cultural responsiveness. I don't know of any more important imperative on the plates of school leaders today than to ensure equitable access to high quality learning for all students. And that includes equitable access to your very best teachers, equitable access and through no gatekeeping to your coursework, to all kinds of high quality learning, as well as an emphasis on ensuring that marginalized and underrepresented students have better access to learning opportunities than they've ever had before. I really commend all of the framers of PSEL for the work and attention they've paid to equity and cultural responsiveness throughout the documents. The standard itself simply states that effective educational leaders strive for equity of educational opportunity and culturally responsive practices to promote each student's academic success and well-being. So let's just look at that standard statement for a couple of seconds here together. There's some strong verbs in there that you strive for equity, not just promoting equity or acknowledging equity, but that you strive for it. They've also coupled equity with cultural responsiveness as a pair throughout the standards, which I think is really important in terms of concept to practice. And then I love how the standards most often end, and that is promoting each student's academic success and well-being. For those of you who've been around the profession as long as I have, you'll remember those days when the focus was all about the whole child. PSEL recognizes and kind of resurrects that notion of the whole child, that it's about academic success with care and support that leads to overall well-being. I wouldn't even hesitate to say happiness. So the standards themselves, as I mentioned earlier, the language really appeals to me in a very aspirational way. This quote from the framers in the crosswalk document, the one I mentioned earlier from Great Teachers and Leaders, really hits home on the mandate that PSEL establishes for school leaders when it comes to equity and cultural responsiveness. As you can read here, Standard 3 encourages perceptions of student diversity as an asset for teaching and learning. Again, not just promoting it or celebrating it, but leveraging diversity as an asset for teaching and learning. It also urges school leaders to confront and alter institutional biases, not just recognizing them, not giving a nod to those instructional biases, but confronting and altering them. And it calls school leaders to serve as true advocates for equity and cultural responsiveness in all aspects of leadership. You'll see that the crosswalk framers noted that in addition, the standards emphasize preparing students to be productive themselves in a diverse global society, rather than focusing only on improving their academic or social outcomes. So in this equity and cultural responsiveness standards, there is a high expectation that we would all contribute to the greater good. So again, while I do find them to be extremely practical and descriptive of the work, there's also a very powerful aspirational thread that runs throughout the standards. And you see it really strongly here in Standard 3 and in that Standard 5 community of support and care. So as we're coming up, nearing the end of our time together, I love the language that John provided on this slide. Whoa, that's a lot of information. So we didn't want today's webinar to simply be just a ton of stuff for you to be thinking about. I hope as you thought about the chat and the poll and some of those things that perhaps you've engaged a little bit in some introspection about where you are with PSEL yourself, if it in fact is something that you're already working on or will likely to be working on in the future. So I thought about those in terms of who you might be. So what should you be thinking about, all of us first, and that is that PSEL, one of our big takeaways, is new and improved. As I've mentioned today, there's an increase on emphasis on students at the center. The real centrality of students in the model, I think, is laudable. There's an emphasis on equity. There's a much deeper dive into talent development. And the expectations when it comes to teaching and learning are this beautiful combination of challenge and support, rigor and care. Here in Kentucky, as a microcosm of what may be happening in your own state, we're beginning to incorporate PSEL by starting with principal preparation. I mentioned our new regulations. Many other states are following a parallel path. And for those of you who are school leaders, it's very likely that PSEL, if not already, will become the basis upon which your annual performance evaluation is founded. And in Kentucky, we expect that'll happen when regulations change over the course of the next 2 to 3 years. And once again, many other states are on a parallel path. So also we wanted to share some resources for you. John has done a great job of getting follow-up information to you. He mentioned that you'll receive an exit survey when you finish, and then we'll also be we'll be posting these resources that I used in preparation for today on our webinar page, and we're also going to be emailing that out to you as well. So if that has stirred up any questions, you have the Q&A feature that you'll find there at the bottom, I think at the bottom where your toolbar is on your Zoom page. You're welcome to include questions for me there now, or if it's easier and you're more accustomed to using the chat, feel free to do that as well. And while John takes us to the finish line, I'll be looking for any questions, comments, as my friend Lars Bjork says, rude remarks, anything that you want to add there. Maybe I shouldn't call for those. I'll be taking a look at those by way of concluding it. So I'll turn it, first, just let me thank you so much for your time on a busy Friday afternoon. I learned a lot preparing. I look forward to the chance to sharing with those of you who were able to join us today. I'm super excited about the potential of our 40-minute focus webinars moving forward, and I hope that you'll join us and tell friends about us, and then also give us some feedback about how we might make these upcoming sessions relevant and timely for you as busy school leaders, higher ed faculty, and anyone else who has joined us today.
Thank you, Dr. Young, and we're grateful for your time and effort to talk to us about this important topic. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. At the conclusion of the webinar, we will send an email to you with a brief survey to give us feedback on the session and an opportunity to learn more about our program. And at the end of the survey, you'll be redirected to the homepage for the 40-minute focus series, where you can get a copy of the slides. It'll give us the resource links are already up there, but you'll have to give us a little bit of time to get this the slide deck and the video up there. But you can always watch this webinar again at your convenience. So, for now, so long.
John, I see we do have one question.
Oh, yes, we do. One question. Well, it's a comment from one of our participants, just appreciating what a good job and super job, like the topic. So thank you.
Oh, great. Thank you so much.
So yeah, for now then, good weekend to everyone. So long, and we'll see you in the next episode. Bye for now.